you start thinking ahead and you're like, oh my God, I can't do this again. I cannot go into that cold water again. And that's the difference. The guys who give into that and say, I can't do it, they're right. And I've tried to tell people this. It's the same with mental programming. If you tell yourself you're never going to be good, you're right. If you tell yourself you can never make it through Hell Week or you can't make it through that evolution, you're right. Eventually you will quit.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest, I am super excited about. I briefly met him when I visited the Navy SEAL Museum. He's a Navy SEAL who got severely wounded in combat. He is a New York Times bestselling author, speaker, and entrepreneur. He motivates and inspires audience all around the country. He is the embodiment of the overcome mindset. His book is titled Overcome. I'm so excited to welcome him onto the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Redman. Thank you, Jason, for being on the show.
Honored to be here. Gina, what's up?
I am so excited. I'm just going to get right into it because I have an hour of your time and I have so much to ask you. I'm going to start from beginning, well, not beginning of birth, but beginning of military. You grew up in a military family.
So dark and stormy night.
And your dad mentioned being a SEAL. Then you got the opportunity to train with them prior to going to BUD/S and all that. And you said when I was listening to one of your interviews, the training was intense, right? What did you do? What was the training that they put you through to lead you up to getting ready for BUD/S? And how was it for you?
Often there's a misnomer. I think some people watch Hollywood movies and they think SEALs are these gigantic, strapping, muscle-bound, Arnold Schwarzenegger-looking guys, and that's really not true. We have some guys, obviously, that look like that. The average SEAL is about 5'10", 180, and they're very strong for their body weight, and they have very big endurance strength, if you will. So they're very fit and they're very strong for their size. And that, weightlifting plays a part in that, but really it's much more about strength with your body weight, your ability to do pull-ups, your ability to do dips, your ability to do push-ups and pull your body up with weight, like, maybe with a weight vest or things like that. And a lot of running. There's a lot of running, a lot of swimming. So I basically looked at what do I need to do. There weren't any programs. I mean, I was getting ready to become a SEAL in 1992, 91, came into the Navy in 1992. So I just basically said, hey, I need to run, I need to swim, and I need to get really strong with push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups. And the other thing that I did is I knew what the SEAL screening test was, which hasn't changed much from back then to what it is now. It's a 500-yard swim. Then you have 10 minutes to get out and change. And in that 10 minutes, you have to be ready. As soon as the 10 minutes up, then you got to do your push-ups. You have 2-minute rest. You do your sit-ups, 2-minute rest, and then you do your pull-ups. Then you have a 10-minute rest and you do your run. Once a month, I did that test. And I don't know why as a kid, I was like, well, this is the way you do it. So I followed it to the letter. And it's something I've done my whole life. If I'm training for something, I try to duplicate, not every time, but like for the SEAL swim, for instance, the New York SEAL swim that I try and do every year, I try and go do some long open water conditioning swims, and I will literally get out and do my push-ups and pull-ups and do the run and kind of duplicate it. I think that's really important. In doing that, I think it prepared me physically to be ready for BUD/S. It definitely prepared me to crush the screening test when I did it. It's amazing to me the amount of young men I've met that we'd run screening tests or watch who maybe they're a fast swimmer, but by the time they get to their pull-ups, they're smoked. And that tells me they didn't do the training tests the way it's designed, one after another, building that really overall muscular endurance you have to have. And then the flip side of the coin was I knew training was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be brutally hard. I mean, you look at the attrition rates. I mean, 80% of people that show up for training quit. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you it's not a walk in the park. You better be ready to get, kicked in the balls. And that's how it was. I mean, it was definitely not easy. There were many days I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can make it through this, but I just focused on, we'll get to the end. And that's how I made it through. I also, one of the things that I try and give advice to anyone, this is a lesson that applies in life, and it's a lesson that applies in buds. Quitting, most of the time when we quit something, it is done in the midst of hardship, and it's an emotional decision. This is hard. This is painful. I'm caught up in this moment, in this emotion, so I'm going to quit because what I want is relief. And I always tell people, never quit in the moment. Like, at least if you truly think it's not for you, at least get to the end of the evolution and then reevaluate and decide, hey, is this really not for you? Because at least now you're not making a split-second emotional decision. You're making a calculated decision, and that's much better in this life.
Oh my God, it's like you read my questions prior. I outline what I want to ask, all my guests.
A lot. I have people that say, wow, you answered 3 of my questions with one.
Yeah, and I wanted to know about staying the course when you want to quit and when it's okay to quit. And, making a decision when you're emotional is just not good in general. I wanted to ask you, with your training and hitting those times and stuff, were there ever days where you didn't hit those times? And if there were, it's like, that frustration that you were feeling, how did you, again, not allow the emotion, or if you were feeling emotional in that moment, allow you to push past that to keep going?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a real fast runner. I was one of the top runners in my class. So that was never a challenge for me. And I was pretty strong with my body weight. I was pretty strong. Swimming was a challenge to me, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I was pretty good on the O course. I wouldn't say I was in the top 10 of the class, but I was definitely in the top 25%. And one day on the O course in first phase, I just had a horrible day. I messed up on an obstacle. And then, oftentimes we get inside our head, and I was behind on time. And then it's like I messed up on another one. And by the time I got to, it's like the rope swing obstacle. You have to run and grab the rope on a log and launch yourself up, and you land on another log that's about, 5 feet off the ground. And you kind of got to balance on that log and let go of the rope and move on with the rest of the obstacle. So I was already behind time. I'm all in my head, and I hit that rope and I missed it. And I tried again and again and again and again. And it must have taken me 15 times. So by the time I finished the obstacle course, I was dead last. And back then, obviously, now we're not allowed to do this because, oh my God, we're hazing and hurting people's feelings. But I'd wear a pink T-shirt that said Miss O course for having the slowest time on the O course. And, I don't know, I accepted it. I just accepted it. I didn't really beat myself up too much about it. I was like, hey man, you're good on the O course. You had a bad day. Yes, you got hazed and you got extra attention, but tomorrow's a new day. We start again. Swimming was, I was not the best swimmer. I was a very strong swimmer and very comfortable in the water, but I'd never done time swimming. I never swam in school or anything like that. And a mistake I made preparing for SEAL training is they said, hey, when you do the swim test, it's side stroke or breaststroke. So I never swam freestyle. I never did a lot of conditioning swims, I should say. They were all long-term. Well, in SEAL training, you'll do all kinds of different swims, including short distance, crawl, front crawl, or freestyle. So those were some mistakes that I made and learned along the way. But still not that good a swimmer. I broke my arm in second phase. I rolled back into this. I rolled out of class 200 and rolled into 202. And they only gave me 3 weeks from the time I got my cast off until the time I classed up again. So I was weak. My upper body was weak. And I was failing. I failed like multiple swims. And they were like, if you don't pass these swims, we're going to kick you out. So thankfully, they paired me with a great guy who was a fast swimmer who basically just screamed at me the entire swim. And I painfully made it. So everyone has their challenge. And I don't want to say everybody. We there are some guys who are just genetic freaks. I mean, they're amazing at everything. But most guys that go through training have at least one thing they're really good at, and then there's something else that they definitely have to challenge and push themselves through.
What's going on through your mind? You made it to phase 2, which is like, wow, now you're having a lot of challenges here where, you might get kicked out. What's going on through your head, and what's the pressure that you're feeling to get to succeed at this and not fail, not get kicked out?
One of the things I've always been pretty good at, even today in my life, is not looking too far down the road. And this is a critical thing with buds. I think it's a critical thing in entrepreneurship. I mean, it's important to be aware and look further down the road at the challenges. But if you obsess over that stuff, and you're so obsessed over something that's beyond your control, and a lot of people unfortunately live their life this way, you stop focusing on the right here and now, which is really what you should be focusing. So in SEAL training, that's pretty much for me how it was. It was just like, okay, get done with this swim. Don't look further down the road. And the instructors told you that, don't, evolution to evolution, day to day. Don't look further down the road. You'll overwhelm yourself. You just focus on getting through the evolution, and that's the thing. And I mean, I failed pool comp. For those that don't know, it's probably the second hardest evolution in SEAL training. It's the culmination exercise for dive week, where you're learning how to do all your underwater emergency procedures, and you do it. Back when I went through, you did it with an old Jacques Cousteau type rig, old with the double hose, and they like those rigs because they could break them. They could tear them apart and break them underwater, and you could actually kind of put it back together if you knew what you were doing. And pool comp was the final exercise where on the last day of pool week, you would have 2 instructors that would swim down and attack you and literally kind of kick your ass on the bottom and slam you off the bottom and try and knock the wind out of you, and they'd rip all your gear off. And then you would have to methodically fix all your gear. You'd have to get your air running again. You would have to get your mask on. You would have to get all your straps adjusted. And there was a very methodical sequence. You had to go in sequence. If you missed a step or you did something out of turn, you failed. Obviously, if you went to the surface, you failed. So it was a very hard evolution. I don't know many guys that passed on the first try. You had 4 tries to pass. And I failed it 3 times, me and my roommate. And I remember it was Friday afternoon, so we were done, and they said, okay, you guys are going to retest on Monday. And that was a long weekend. It was a long weekend. We stayed him and I used to go out partying all the time, and we did not go out that weekend. We sat in our room, and we did breath holding drills all weekend. And I mean, the good news is by the time Monday came around, I felt, man, I was up to like 4 minutes holding my breath. So I was like, I feel pretty good about this. And sure enough, both he and I passed on Monday. So
I was listening to you talk about Hell Week and how like you have these hallucinations and you're absolutely freezing 90% of the time and you're covered in sand and, it sounds miserable. I'm sure it was absolutely miserable too. What hallucinations did you have going through that whole week?
I saw things. I remember like looking down at the ground and seeing like it reminded me of like the Escher paintings. It was like black and white checkered, and the world was like melting. Like I was like stepping. Like what am I stepping on? I remember that. I remember the biggest thing I remember is during Around the World, which is an evolution where you have to row your boats all the way around Coronado Island. It's like a 14 or 15 mile transit. And I remember like hearing instructor voices out in the middle of the ocean. Like the instructors are right here and there's nobody there. It was all in my mind. I saw chain link fences out in the middle of the ocean. I was trying to get our boat to turn because we're going to hit that fence. I saw quay walls, like concrete walls out in the middle of the ocean that I thought we were going to hit.
How do you like continue doing the training and getting through it while being on such little sleep, being physically exhausted, being really cold? And I was listening to an instructor do a speech, and he mentioned like this is probably the first time many of you are going to go to war with yourself. And I thought that was really, really powerful. And I don't know, like, if, I guess, like, in a way, like, there's really no training. I mean, it's just kind of like, becomes a mental game versus a physical game. So how do you mentally set yourself up to break through and continue, and then have that for when you're in combat and all this other stuff that then comes with what being a SEAL?
This is the most dangerous battlefield you'll ever walk on. This will enable you to overcome anything. It will also stop you from accomplishing anything. And it is your mind that you're fighting the most against in Hell Week, because on every evolution is hard. Every evolution is hard. On top of that, you're freezing and coated in sand and chafed and bleeding and burning and uncomfortable. Your muscles are locking up from shaking all the time. So that alone is enough to make you say, I can't do this anymore. That's what's happening. Your brain is telling you, I can't take this shaking anymore. I can't, you dry out just a little, and the thought of getting wet again is like, I mean, there are a lot of guys that get hydrophobic after Hell Week for a while. Like, you don't even you look at the water and you cringe and start shaking. So add on these hard evolutions that you're doing, whatever it is, a time to run or, some sort of hard obstacle course part of this. And your mind is telling you, you can't do this. You're not going to, there's no way you can finish this. There's no way you're going to be able to take this boat and get it up over that wall. Or guys start looking too far ahead and they say, I can't, you'll do a session of surf torture. I'm sorry, now it's called immersion therapy. You do a session of unicorn swimming. And you're not allowed, you start thinking ahead and you're like, oh my God, I can't do this again. I cannot go into that cold water again. And that's the difference. The guys who give into that and say, I can't do it, they're right. And I've tried to tell people this. It's the same with mental programming. If you tell yourself you're never going to be good, you're right. If you tell yourself you can never make it through Hell Week or you can't make it through that evolution, you're right. Eventually you will quit. I tell guys there's 3 rules to making it through SEAL training. Rule number 1, don't ring that bell, period. I mean, that's the most simple rule of all. And it's amazing. I mean, how many people you tell that, but 80% of people do it. And I tell them, I'm like, you can't control the things outside of your control. You can't control injury. You can't control performance, I mean, a little bit, but sometimes that's a little bit outside of your control. There's only one thing unequivocally you can control, and that's whether you ring that bell or not. If you don't ring that bell, you have an 80% chance of making it through training. But rule number 2, this becomes the big one, don't mentally quit. Guys start doubting themselves and start to quit long before they ever ring that bell. They've already committed hours prior. They've started to doubt themselves. I don't know if I can do this evolution. I don't know if I can handle another session of surf torture or unicorn swimming. I don't know if I can, do whatever it is. And, but when you plant those seeds in your mind, I tell guys, you are on the glide slope to quitting. Mentally quitting leads to physically quitting. And then the last one you got to accept is that, training is designed to be as unfair as possible. And the guys who can't wrap their head around that, you will be told, hey, here's what you need to do in steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you'll do them perfect. You'll crush it. We did so good. We knocked out steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the instructors will be like, yeah, but you forgot about step 3.279. You're like, oh, we didn't know that step. And they're like, that's right, you didn't, and you fail. And then you get beat for it. And that happens over and over and over and over again. And after a while, it takes a toll on you mentally. Like, hey, we're doing everything right. And what happens is guys start to go, this isn't fair. Absolutely right. Guess you want to know what's not fair? Combat. Combat is unequivocally not fair. And they're looking for guys who, despite the pain, despite the discomfort, despite the fact that it's unfair, you can still drive forward and function and be positive and push your team forward. Those are the guys they're looking for. If you can't do that, you'll quit and you go away.
Let's equate that now to civilian life. I mean, life's unfair. I mean,
very simple. I teach a course on this.
People don't seem to understand that life is not going to accommodate you. And you have to be able to accept that and understand that. And that's part of the pain and discomfort of just life. And the stronger you are, the more you're able to just be like, okay, I'm going to just find a new way. Like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. So what did you do? What tactics did you do to understand? It seemed like you had a really good understanding of that mental mindset. How did you develop that or what exercise did you give yourself where whenever that came in, like for me, when I was training with the SEAL, I mean, the word quit came in like every other second, and I would just start laughing and smiling, and I would literally, like, I'd start singing. I would have to be my biggest cheerleader because I knew, like, it's not going to be forever. Like, this is not the end. But in order to get the outcome that you want, and that outcome was to become mentally and physically stronger, the only way you're going to do that is by not quitting. And if you're saying you want this, well, this is what it takes. So it was a constant battle, but I took did what I needed to do to shift that, and not give in to that voice and the body that was ready to be like, we want the comfort of being home on a couch. What did you do for yourself?
Oftentimes it would make me angry. And I would channel that anger into action and purpose. It would make me run harder or push harder or drive harder to get through that evolution. Oftentimes that anger I would channel into motivation, and I would be cheering on my teammates and, sometimes even annoyingly so, like, hey, everybody's in the suck, and everybody, we all do it as humans when we're really struggling. Everybody starts to turn inward. We start to focus on our own pain and misery. And I often tell other leaders this, like, hey, if everybody's getting quiet, nobody's saying anything, and everybody's focused on the suck, that's probably the biggest time that you need to get vocal. And I frequently would recognize that and use that anger to drive that. In real life, yeah, the lessons are the same. I mean, the not quitting. One of the things that I talk about though is sometimes people in training, it's a little more black and white. Quitting versus not quitting. I mean, quitting, you go ring that bell. Not quitting. Where it starts to get gray is when we talk about the mentally quitting. And I think that is true in life too. Maybe we're doing something we don't like anymore, and we're not giving it our all anymore. We're not really going through the motions. We're just going through the motions. We're not actually putting a whole lot of effort. You're there, but you're not actually there. You're just kind of hanging on. And I tell people, if you're a part of a team or you're part of doing something, like, don't do that. You're not contributing to your team. You're not helping yourself. You're just on the glide slope. You've already started to quit. There is a distinction, though, in the real world. Sometimes we're doing things, and we tell ourselves, "Well, I'm going to keep grinding," but we're wasting time and effort and resources. And this is what I talk about being the difference between quitting versus falling back. Because I often have people who have this idea that if I stop at any point, then that's quitting. And that's not really true. Sometimes we need to take a moment to fall back. And A good example would be if you're in an intense firefight, pushing forward into this massive fire does not make sense. You're literally moving to your death. You're sacrificing people and assets. And, so instead we fall back to a better position and we regroup and we reevaluate and we reassess. And then we decide, do we need to reattack or do we move in a different direction? And I try to explain that to people in life. Like, hey, sometimes you get so mired down in the pain and discomfort and you're convinced like, hey, if I just keep grinding against this wall, eventually I'm going to get through. Well, that's not really true. And for many people, the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing and think that you're going to get to the other side. So yeah, fall back and reassess. I mean, so often when we do this, when we take that pain and discomfort off for a minute, it actually gives you a second to breathe and a second to look around on what's really happened. I mean, when you're in the middle of the chaos and the fight, sometimes it's hard to see. So taking that step back is critically important. And now it makes you decide, hey, reassess. Do we re-engage? Do we reattack? Do we go a different direction? So that's a big difference between quitting versus falling back. One, done in emotion. The other one is done with strategic and thoughtful intent.
Since we're talking about quitting, I'm going to really fast forward to your time at Ranger School when you quit.
I did.
And I want to know, like you also mentioned, which I thought was really interesting. It's like they asked you does that mean you quit? And you said yes. And in your mind, you were like, you wanted to take it back. It was just the emotion, the anger that you were going through. And it was such a low point in your life because of what was going on with the leadership and the call that you made, and then going to Ranger School to redeem yourself, to then quit on yourself. And I want to talk about that moment and what the choice that you made, and then coming back from that moment and going back to Ranger School for a second time.
Yeah, and like I said, most dangerous battlefield you'll ever walk. And I frequently talk about we have to be very careful what you feed yourself in your mind. And all of us are guilty. But I was feeding myself a narrative of the guys are never going to follow you again. You're a fuck up. You screwed this up, all this. And still kind of a victim mindset I talk about in the book. So when that happened, I convinced myself that now I'd really done it. Like this was the end. Like there was no way I could come back from this. And then I'll be honest, if Vince Peterson, the super respected SEAL commander, had not answered that phone when the colonel called him, there would be no podcast. There would be no Jason Redman. I'd be maybe a Walmart greeter or something. No offense against Walmart greeters out there. But thankfully, he talked some sense into me. And I think his biggest thing was I told him that I could not recover from the mistakes that I made. The guys would never follow me again. And he gave me the most succinct, best definition leadership I've ever had. He just said, Red, guys will follow if you give them a reason to. That's it. That's the essence of leadership. But you have to give them a reason to follow you. So you need to go cross Ranger School, come back to the SEAL teams, give the guys a reason to follow you. And that, I don't know, it locked in my head like, hey, there is a way out of this hole that I've dug for myself. And it's done and then this became some of the foundations of leadership that I now teach and I tried to live my life by. You got to lead yourself. We lead others. You lead always. You don't do like I was doing where I was picking and choosing when I wanted to lead.
Oh, so how do you go from a victor mindset, like that you develop this such strong mindset, to then going to a victim mindset? And then I know you come back from that victor mindset, but how do you go from being up there to then just being the victim?
Arrogance. Letting your ego get too big. You think you know everything and you think that, you've got it all figured out. So you think that you won't have hardships or trials and tribulations. And that's just not true. Leadership is a journey that never ends. You're always going to have problems. You're always going to have life ambushes that I talk about. So stay humble, recognize that sometimes you'll make the right decisions and sometimes you'll make the wrong decisions. And you do your best to learn and grow and challenge your beliefs. I went through a period of my life where I thought I was this great leader and I wasn't. So when I got knocked down, that was kind of a shock, which led to this victim mindset. And there is a tendency, arrogance is also something where we have a tendency to, well, it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. And I was doing that. That's also a victim mindset. Like, whoa, it's all your guys' fault. And you all threw me under the bus. When the reality is, most of the time, even if you totally got screwed over, there may be a little bit of ownership, maybe 10% ownership, even if you got totally screwed over. In this case, it was probably 90% ownership on my side. But, that's all part of the journey. And I really tell people, I mean, Jocko says it best with extreme ownership, which I interviewed him in the Overcome book. Good leaders recognize, like, hey, no matter what, anytime anything goes wrong, there is a part of you that's responsible for that. Even if an unexpected hurricane came along, well, guess what? You can't control the weather, but we should take into account that unexpected things can happen. And if we do that, then at least, maybe we don't have an instant solution for, the anti-hurricane, contingency plan. But you at least have, hey, we recognize that if something was to come along to disrupt this, we need to make sure we have an alternate plan on how we address it. And I think that's, some of the higher levels of leadership. And I wasn't doing that for a while.
Were you a good teammate?
I was always a good teammate. I would say when I became a leader, I lost some of that because I was thinking oftentimes much more about myself and not necessarily as much about the guys. I became more focused on, I was trying to be this great leader, but oftentimes I wasn't doing it the right way. I was looking for shortcuts to shine. That's dangerous. That's what led me down that valley. I wanted to get in the fight. Hey, look at me. I'm going to save the day. Rainbows and parades. And that just wasn't the case. And that was a mistake. So yeah, that definitely humbled me. And I'm very thankful today. I've had a lot of success, but I stay humble. I recognize all of it can be gone tomorrow. And I'm okay with that.
What are the qualities that make a good teammate that you also bring into being a good leader?
I think it was summarized best when I came back to my second platoon as an officer. And my boss was a prior enlisted guy who was a great guy. Phenomenal. And he was such a good mentor to me on so many different levels, because he was smart enough to recognize the complexity of bringing a guy into the platoon who had screwed up. And the guys weren't that excited to have me. So he had to accomplish a couple of things. He had to build trust with the guys, so get the guys to trust I had the ability to do this. He had to do that by putting me into leadership positions so that they could see I had the ability. But he also had to rebuild my confidence because, whether I knew it or not, it was kind of shaken. I had screwed up. So he was really smart on that. And he gave me a lot of great opportunities. And he said it in the very beginning. He said, Red, I don't care what happened in, Afghanistan, the past. He said, all I care about is the here and now. He said, I'm going to call upon you to lead. When I need you to lead, I need you to lead. He said, and when I need you to follow, I need you to follow. That's a good teammate. A good teammate that recognizes, hey, I don't always need to be in the spotlight. I think younger, immature leaders, and I was one of these, feel like, oh my God, I always have to be leading. I always have to be telling people what to do and meddling and micromanaging and all these different things. And the reality is, man, if you have a great team, oftentimes the leader doesn't have to do a whole lot other than, keep an eye on that we're moving in the right direction and hopefully course correct or, stop from anything going on. He was really good at that. Great leaders recognize they don't need all the recognition. They don't have to be in the spotlight as a leader. They would much rather see their team or their company get that recognition. He was really good at that. I remember one time we were doing a very complicated mobility training, and we were coming up on the final very complicated exercise. We had done a series of exercises that led to this final FTX exercise. And they sprung it on us kind of in the moment, like this contingency you just got tasked to do. If I remember, it was like a helicopter crash or something like that. You guys have to move to the crash site, secure the crash site, get the wounded. It's in enemy territory, all this. And my boss, he could have said, okay, let's go, guys. Here's the plan. And he could have, it was a complicated scenario. He could have looked good, and he could have been, hey, I'm the leader and look how good I look navigating this difficult scenario. But he didn't. He said, Red, you're in charge. I'm going to hang out with the instructors. And it was a huge moment. I think it was the first time in that platoon where I did a good job. And the guys were like, this guy he actually did pretty good there. So it was such a good example because for him, he gave up an opportunity to shine. And I think that's really the mark of a great leader and the mark of a good teammate.
Today's episode is sponsored by my favorite jewelry company, Omnia. Omnia blends genuine crystals with cutting-edge NFC technology to create the world's first smart crystal bracelet. This bracelet connects to the Elevate web application, giving you a membership to over 200 self-care resources, from meditations to journals to breathing exercises and so much more. Visit discoveromnia.com and use code MindsetPodcast for 40% off. DiscoverOmnia.com, your key to wellness. What's the mindset that you have today? Because it seems like it's a very different mindset than what you had on active duty. So what's during that time? So is there what's the mindset that you wish you would have had then that you happen to have now?
I live by this. I call it the three rules of leadership. Number one, lead yourself. I think I had gotten off course with that. And oftentimes people don't fully understand that. People think leadership is telling other people what to do. And there's a lot of leaders out there who lead that way, but they're horrible leaders of themselves.
Is that how you led in the beginning when you were a poor leader?
Well,
like, how did you lead as a poor leader?
Oh yeah, I was leading like that.
Okay, right.
Gotcha. And then there's a lot of leaders that make that mistake. So I often tell people 70% of leadership is leading yourself. It's being self-aware enough to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. Oftentimes, many leaders try and hide their weaknesses, so they'll avoid doing the things that they're weak at, so it doesn't show their weakness, thinking that by doing that, it makes them look stronger. But the reality is, by embracing that, let's use running as an example. Maybe the leader is a terrible runner. So there are some leaders who will just avoid running. Every time there's a run, they have an excuse why they're not at the run or whatever it is. But that doesn't build respect. And it doesn't say, hey, I lead myself. I attack my problems head on. The leader instead, who you're like, that guy's a bad runner. But he kills himself. He's literally heaving and throwing up as he comes across the finish line to be last, but you're like, oh man, I'd follow that guy anywhere, even though, you're like, he's so slow, but I love that guy. You're like, that guy's so passionate. He's like, I'm giving it, he emptied everything in his tank, and that's leading yourself. And people will follow that. And I try to explain that, like, hey man, at the end of the day, you should be looking in the mirror and ask, am I the best version of myself? And I try and live my life that way now. I try to physically be my best. I'm a lot older now, but, mentally, with my business, with my people, with my family. So I think that's the biggest part of leadership, because then it naturally leads itself to rule number 2, leading others. They're naturally willing to follow you because you've shown that, hey, this guy, he's or she is committed. They're goal setters. They accomplish their goals. People will follow success. And the other part of leading others is allowing your people to grow. Give them the right and left limits, kind of like my leader did in that situation where he didn't need the credit. He allowed us to grow. He allowed me to grow, and he allowed the platoon and the troop to grow by me being in that leadership position and navigating through that problem. And good leaders, I think, will recognize that also. It's no different in parenting. I'm trying to explain this to parents. Stop micromanaging your kids. Like, let them go out and make some mistakes. I mean, obviously you need to step in if they're going to do something that creates long-term damage. But at the end of the day, you're trying to grow your kids into functioning adults that can make decisions on their own. Sometimes they're not going to make the best decisions, but that's okay. They learn from that. let them get in trouble a little bit, and they'll learn from it. My daughter did this. My daughter got in trouble, and they were gonna. I won't get into the details of what happened. One of her friends got busted with something, and they were just gonna let my daughter off, and I was like, no. I was like, I want her to do community service. And she was mad at me, but I was like, I want you to learn, like, there are repercussions for making bad decisions in this life. There's no long-term impact, but, it was a lesson. I think good leaders help do that. We hold our people accountable and help them grow and learn. And then the last part is leading always. And that part, it's easy to lead in the good times. It's stepping up and leading in the hard times. And, when I was wounded, that was a great example of that.
I definitely want to hit and talk about that really bad day you had in combat. And then this was in your book. You didn't just survive. I mean, you're thriving. Everyone's they listen to you. They're following you. You're leading because you had such a bad day that you almost didn't make it. You made it, but then you didn't just make it. Like, you're successful now. And it's like, not that you weren't then, but like you just took what was going on. You had 4 years, 40 surgeries. If I recall, it was around year 3, you were pushing everybody away. You were drinking a lot. You were spiraling. And then you ended up pulling yourself out of that, with help of your family and getting help. And now you're thriving in life. And how you accepted what was going on. There's no changing it. There's no going back to who you were before this incident. And I want to talk about how you when, if you remember, like where you surrendered to accept it and, move forward.
I think that's one of the biggest things. I think oftentimes, I talk about the X, being on the X. People get stuck on the X in this life. Point of attack, point of incident, point of crisis. Everyone in life is going to go through life ambushes. My leadership failure was the first life ambush I ever encountered. It took me a little while to get out of that. I definitely didn't launch out of that. I mean, it probably took me 6 months before I finally accepted. It was at Ranger School after I had quit that I finally accepted, like, oh, hey, yeah, whose fault it is you're here? It's none of your platoon mates that you want to blame. It's yours. And it was the decision-making that you made and poor decision-making and not effectively leading yourself. Same thing, that second life ambush, obviously being all shot up. But really, I would say the tertiary impact of that was the massive injuries and the years of surgeries and that I had to endure. And that was a uphill battle to look at when they were like, hey, it's going to take years to put you back together. But I had a massive advantage. And I try to explain this to people. Coming off the leadership failure and growing out of that to find success out of that prior to being injured probably was one of the greatest gifts that ever could have happened to me. Because that's actually the hardest road that's the deepest hole I've ever climbed out of. I mean, that was the hardest thing I've ever dealt with. To be told, like, you don't measure up, we want to kick you out, like, you're not one of us anymore. That was really hard to earn back the trust of my teammates. Now, I managed to do that. And then I'm severely wounded. And what I realized as I was laying in that hospital bed is, hey, bro, like everything you had to do to build yourself back up as a leader is exactly the same formula for this. It's the same formula as buds. You take it one step at a time. You don't look, a year down the road. It's, okay, one evolution at a time, one surgery at a time, one rehab session at a time. And all the leadership lessons that I talked about, you stop focusing on you. I mean, you lead yourself. Well, how do you do that? Well, you got to be positive. And you got to look at what's the next goal. So for me, the next goal was, what's my next surgery? And within that surgery, as soon as that's done, what rehab do I need to do to get myself as healed as possible so we can go to the next surgery? We're going to continue to build and, how do we rebuild Jason Redman? So all the things
I was trying to ask you a quick question real quick
Right.
on talking about the rebuild and the surgery and stuff like that. How is it afterward? Like when you went through 3 noses before the one you got, right? So
Well,
how
this
did
is
it
the third.
So how about like when you go for the surgery and it doesn't go well, and then you have to like what is that time period like from when it doesn't go well to the next one? And how do you stay in that positive mindset of, I just remember for myself when I lost my hearing and just going to the test and then finding out I didn't get any hearing back, and like really believing that I'm going to get hearing back and doing what I thought I would do to then go to the next test to learn I didn't get hearing. And I did that for 10 years. Like it was just like, it's so emotional. How was it for you to like go like, is this to go from one bad surgery to the next surgery to a bad surgery, all that stuff?
I talk to people about what are the 3 components of an overcome mindset. So 3 components of an overcome mindset. Number 1 is awareness. So I was not naive enough to go into surgery and say, well, this will not have a perfect outcome.
Oh, that's me. Yeah.
These are complicated. I hope it'll be great, but it may not be. So number 1 is awareness. And this applies in everything in life. I live my life this way, and I try to teach others to do the same thing. You could step off the curb and break your leg or be hit by a car. Or, right now, I don't know where you are. I'm in Virginia, but a meteor could come out of the sky and split. That could hit both of us where we are. Strange things happen. So number 1's awareness. Number 2, and bad things happen to good people all the time. This is the other thing that people get wrapped around. I'm a good person. Well, welcome to the real world. Number 2 is preparation. So now I mentally prepare myself. So, hey, I really want this surgery to go well, or I really want to get this job, or I really want to, win this contest. And the awareness is, guess what? That may not happen. So now the preparation becomes, even if it's only mental preparation, I'm mentally preparing for myself for, what if it doesn't? What if it goes wrong? And then number 3 is action. So when it happens, now you got to take action. Don't get me wrong. There were plenty of moments where I needed to take some time to feel sorry for myself. The first surgery to reconstruct my orbit did not go well. And I had massive pain. They actually compressed my eye and it created massive pain, but they couldn't go back and fix it. I had to wait 8 weeks of having wicked headaches and massive pain before they could go back. I had severe double vision. I couldn't, it was horrible. That was hard. And you were wondering, will I ever be the same? Will they ever be able to fix it? But we drive forward. Now you start thinking about, okay, well, you're not the only one. There are other people. I had kids. I had at this point become the overcome guy. There were other people that looked to me for, hey, you inspire us. It's tough to be inspirational when you're like feeling sorry for yourself. So, and that really gets into the definition of leading always. That's the thing about leadership. People don't, as hard as this is for people to understand, they don't care. If you're a leader, they're looking for you to lead. And that's really hard sometimes. So that's how I dealt with it. And definitely I had plenty of setbacks. But I've accepted that they were part of the journey. The sign on the door hangs in the wounded ward at Walter Reed, and I put a message for the wounded warriors. And I told them, I said, hey, your progress will be measured in nanometers. And for every 1 step forward, at times you will have 3 steps back. And that's the reality. And sometimes, people need to understand that's part of the journey. Even though it's really hard to build your mind around, an overcome mindset tells you, well, guess what? This is part of the journey. I just have to accept it and try and stay positive and drive forward. Yeah. It's not fair.
When we had Marty Strong on the show and he mentioned negativity, it's like cancer and you got to get away from it because the moment it latches on, it just grows, right? And during around year 3, you were pushing everybody away. Do you remember what the catalyst was that caused that, that negativity to cause you to drink, and then just kind of like spiraled more and more and more, where you just kept beating it?
Yeah, I was coming up on retirement. The world should have been good. And I don't know, facing retirement was disappointing. I didn't get to finish my career how I wanted to. We were coming towards the end of the surgeries, and there were certain things they just couldn't fix. I had gone all across the country trying to find a doctor to fix my arm more. And, I can't, so for my arm, I can't bend any further than this, and I can't extend any further than that, which is amazing, because originally they were going to cut my arm off. The secondary effect, my arm was just locked in this position. So just having this and having my hands, incredible. But as all of us in life, we always want more. And I wanted more because I wanted to be operational still. So it was probably about that time that I had met with one of the head orthopedic surgeons at Duke, who just said, "Hey, man, you're never going to, what you have is a miraculous outcome. Like, you just need to be thankful for it and like go live a good life." So I think it was a lot of things. And then, I just spiraled down. I mean, sometimes, a combination of the invisible wounds of war and the physical wounds and everything. So thankfully, my wife is amazing. We actually have a relationship book coming out in February of 25. We're pretty excited about it. And we tell this story in pretty big depth in the book. She had tried to help me, and I just kept pushing everybody away. And I think this is one of the, it's a problem of type A's. We want to help everybody, and protectors, as I like to call us, military, law enforcement, fire. We're really good at helping other people, but then we think, oh, we don't want anybody to help us. We don't want to show weakness. We can fix it ourselves. And that's kind of what I was doing. And she finally said, hey, and we had a very strong marriage. We'd always agreed from the very beginning, we would never, ever utter the word divorce. Like, we were till death do us part. And she just said, hey, this is how it begins. We're like driving out to an event, and I'm all sullen. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, the end of our marriage. And I'm like, what? And she was smart. She knew how to get my attention. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, if you don't communicate, and if you don't figure out how to get help, like, I can't help you. And it's going to drive us to a conclusion. That's scary. And that finally kind of woke me up. And I was still assigned at the development group, and I went and found the chaplain and a psych, and I said, hey, I need help. And I try and explain that to a lot of guys and gals that are out there that struggle with the invisible wounds. There is no easy button for it. Then the first thing that has to happen for anyone to get off the X is you have to decide. No one can pull you off the X until you decide to get off that X. Once you do, then you have to figure out what works for you. What works for me may not work for you, Gina. And what works for you may not work for somebody else out there. So I just tell guys and gals, like, hey, if you're struggling, you got to go test out all the different modalities to help you. And don't get frustrated when the first 1, 2, 3, maybe even the first 4 don't work. Don't just go back to the bottle and crawl back on the X and say, well, it's not fair, it didn't work. Yeah, okay. When you took down targets, the first breach that didn't go, we're like, damn it, failed breach, we're done, I quit. No, that shit didn't happen. You kept attacking in all kinds of different ways. I'm like, it should be the same way with you.
I like how, and this may tail into our final question, but I like how your book has readers identify their personal enemies and develop strategies to overcome them. And I was listening to the latest documentary that came out about you fighting the insecure voices in your head. What strategies are you doing every day in life to overcome your own personal enemy? those insecurities?
It's funny. I mean, I've done such a good job in my life leading others and motivating and inspiring others, and building others up to help them become the best version of themselves. And I'm really good at probably being a pretty high level version of myself. But I also have a tendency to look at myself tied to the past. Oh yeah, you're that guy that fucked up. Or, I was a scrawny little runt in high school. So I carry sometimes that thought. And I've just kind of ignored it my whole life. So as I get older, now it's more, how do you grow to say, man, I love this person who I am. I do it with my spouse. I do it with my kids. My kids aren't perfect. Neither is my wife. I mean, she's damn near perfect, but so you got to do it with yourself. And I think that's where, I think that's probably the Maslow's hierarchy of highest level self-actualization. You accept that, even my weaknesses and faults or flaws and they're not even real. I mean, some of this stuff is just created in my mind from traumas you have when you're younger. And I think that makes the difference. I will say this to people though, it is not an excuse. So don't allow those little voices and the little demons that you have stop you. And that is a superpower of mine. I've never allowed it to stop me. I've never allowed those little voices or the weight of doubt or whatever it is stop me. I've leaned into it and always gone after it and ignored that. Sometimes it's tiring. So that's where I would tell you, figure out how to get past that sooner than later. But don't ever let it be an excuse. That truly is the overcome mindset. When people tell you or you have it in your mind, maybe you grew up in a really negative family and your parents told you you'd never be able to do this, or I don't know, maybe you were in an abusive relationship and you had a husband or a wife that told you you're just a fuck up and a failure or whatever it is. And you get out into the real world and you hear that voice again, ignore it, drive through it, crush things, and you will build your confidence. And that little voice may always be there. Kind of part of life.
I feel like, unless you have a different piece of advice for the final question of how our listeners can develop mental toughness and tap into untapped potential. I feel like that was
build an
really
overcome mindset. Do hard things.
Yeah.
Follow your hopes and dreams. Like if you're listening to this, I often talk about in some of my speeches about living greatly. And living greatly is this idea that whatever hope or dream you have, maybe you have a dream to become, to have your own business, or maybe you have a dream to write a book, or I don't know, maybe you have a dream to be an actor. I don't care what it is. Do it. Go do it. Don't say, well, that's not possible. Because the problem is you'll get to the end of your life and you'll look back and say, why didn't I do that? Man, you only get one shot at this life. So ignore the naysayers and the haters and the doubters and go after it. And at least if you fail, you can be like, well, at least I went after it, as opposed to the vast majority of people on this planet who look at death like I did and they go, man, I wish I had done this. I wish I had done that. Or all the people that come up to me at events and tell me, I wish I had done this or done that because I speak on these things. Don't be those people.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. I am so grateful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And thank you everyone that is listening. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Patreon member so you get access to our bonus episodes. And I will see you guys next week.